Thank everybody for trudging all the way across their cozy house to join us tonight. I'm glad you all could make it and putting off the shoveling for later on in the storm, except for those who were smart enough to relocate to Arizona prior to this one hitting us. So welcome. So again, for those of you who might be joining us for the first time tonight, the theme of this season's book club is a passion for power. So we've been looking within the plays themselves more than looking at the play as that literary work. We've been looking within the plays for characters whose drive in these stories is their passion for power. And we've explored a variety of what power could mean to everybody involved. So today we originally were looking at the many soldiers and generals and all those folks as part of the war and the politics going on between the Trojans and the Greeks. But if you've got anything other than that, certainly in terms of Cressida herself, in her situation that comes over the course of this play, absolutely feel free. So I've got some places marked that we can start, but if anybody wants to kick us off instead with some aspects of the story that struck them in terms of a character's passion for power and things that they were pursuing in that regard in this play, feel free to raise your virtual hand there and we'll get things started. Barbara?
Well, it seems to me that when I think of power, I think of physical strength and like brutality and, physical combat if you're talking about soldiers.
Yeah.
But the fighting really just comes at the end and it's like one thing right after another. There's no like real description of what happens. And none of the combat scenes really seem to show the victor as being noble. And so it seems to me that the power comes in what people are not doing, like Achilles. He doesn't act, but holds power over, all of the generals and things like that. And so I think it's interesting because it kind of goes with the idea that you can be very powerful using silence.
Yeah, the decision not to engage was an exercise of power, certainly on Achilles, but they found a way to get him. And does anybody remember what the thing was that finally got him going? They tried manipulating, they tried teasing, they tried ignoring him, they tried dismissing his power.
Just kill his best friend, that'll do it.
That'll do it. That'll do it. Yep, that's what it finally was.
Whatever best friend means.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, when he was killed, and they brought his body to his tent, that's finally what got him awoken. To the point where, it's interesting, we'll go back to what Barbara said about that physical strength of power and this idea of combat and power. There was a lot of kind of maneuvering toward the battle. There was a lot of conversation about it. There was a lot of trying to figure and negotiate how all this was going to work and who would fight whom and who should and who shouldn't. And I think it's Hector's challenge to the Greeks that in a lot of ways started this whole ball of power rolling and who should take it. And it really opened up to us, the reader, in looking at this particular world, what types of power these fellows thought of. So I want to take us to some of the I'm going to share my screen. I'll get us to Act 1, Scene 3. And we'll get to just about where things kick in. And let me share screen. Oh, the host disabled participant screen sharing. Maury, you still there? If you're still there, if you could give me the ability to share the screen, that would be great.
Yep, I'm just doing it now.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Yes. All right. That's the one we want to share. All right. Can everybody see this? For those of you who've got the text at home, excuse me, it's Act 1, Scene 3. And it's the first time in the play the word power is specifically spoken, right? And it is, let me get this in. We'll go to that. It's later in the speech. This is quite a speech, isn't it? For those of you who did read the play, it really is something else. Ulysses has some things to say here.
Yeah, it should be right around there, Jeff.
Right there, yeah. If we look at this. And what is, whoops. It's right there, that power into will and appetite. And what he's talking about here is what happens when there's disorder in the world, and what happens when degree is not followed. When people don't pay attention to the way they've structured their world in terms of who has power. That's what degree is all about, is who's got power. And it comes from status. And when you're granted that power, it has to stay that way. Or there is all kinds of chaos that could ensue and problems that then need to be faced. And he's talking about from that very beginning. And when he says, Troy yet upon his basis had been down, and the great Hector's sword had lacked a master, but for these instances, the specialty of rule hath been neglected. And look how many Grecian tents do stand hollow upon this plain, so many hollow factions. When that the general is not like the hive, to whom the foragers shall all repair, what honey is expected? Degree being visited, masked and hidden, the unworthiest shows as fairly in the mask. The heavens themselves, the planets in the center observe degree, priority, and place, insisture, course, proportion, season, form, office, and custom in all line of order. And therefore is the glorious planet Sol in noble eminence enthroned and sphered amidst the other, whose medicinable eye corrects the influence of evil planets. So this is the way things need to be. We need to have that structure. But when the planets in evil mixture to disorder wander, and this is all obviously metaphor for the soldiers and the ranks of their army and the way they're fighting this war against the Trojans all this time. What plagues and what portents, what mutiny, what raging of the sea, shaking of earth, commotion in the winds, frights, changes, horrors, divert and crack, rend and deracinate, the unity and married calm of states quite from their fixture. So all this even disrupts governance structure and things that happen in terms of politics and the ability to execute governance and how they should run the world. Oh, when degree is shaked, which is the ladder of all high designs, the enterprise is sick. How could communities, degrees in schools and brotherhoods in cities, peaceful commerce from dividable shores, the primogeneity and due of birth, prerogative of age, crowns, scepters, look by degree, stand in authentic place. Take but degree away, untune that string, and hark what discord follows. Each thing meets in mere oppugnancy. The bounded waters should lift their bosoms higher than the shores and make a sop of all this solid globe. Strength should be lord of imbecility, and the rude son should strike his father dead. Force should be right, or rather right and wrong. Between these endless jar, justice resides should lose their names, and so should justice too. Then everything includes itself in power. Power into will, will into appetite, and appetite a universal wolf, so doubly seconded with will and power, must make perforce a universal prey.
Please, we're trying.
And last eat up himself. Great Agamemnon's chaos, when degree is suffocate, follows the choking. So right in there, we see this first mention of power itself, but it's all about making sure this structure. And we see how even power is diminished when the structure of degree is not followed. So let's chat about that a little bit, if we could. I've got to make you guys bigger. If I can do that, there we go. So I can see you all and see everybody's hands, if that should happen. Whoops, You see, I'm new to this. All right, I'm going to just stop share for a second while I get you guys up. Okay. All right. I see a hand there. Oh. All right. Somebody's giving us some feedback. So unless you're talking, if you can.
Jeff, can everyone mute unless they are?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, because we're getting interference.
We can mute everyone unless you're speaking. That would be great. All right, good. We got it. All right. Is that Katie in there who wants to speak? Is that who we're looking at? I'm sorry, everybody's small on my screen right now. I saw a hand there down with Rich.
Dennis has a hand up.
All right, we'll get to Dennis in a second.
Whoever that was. Whoever's unmuting now, that's the interference.
Is that Ellen, maybe?
So,
Go ahead, Katie.
Go ahead, Katie.
okay. Katie?
Hi, Katie, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Rich's daughter.
Hi, nice to
Hey,
meet
guys.
you. How's Arizona?
I'm just visiting. Nice to meet you guys. Yeah, thank you for having me.
So did you say something?
So I'm a big classical history nerd.
Right.
I've never actually read this particular play, but I know I've taken a lot of classes in classical history on Agamemnon and Cressida. And so I'm reading along with you right now. Something that really stood out to me is the fact that Cressida stays true to herself throughout the entire play. And one thing that I think gets lost in this play is that Cressida gets seen as a destructive power. But to me, I see her as a power that has stayed true to herself regardless of how wrongly she is interpreted throughout the play. So that's kind of just what I had to say about the power quote. That really resonated with me is that to me, it speaks to Cressida a bit subconsciously.
Yeah, certainly things get really disrupted in her life and structure is not followed. She comes from being a noble person's daughter to being a piece of barter in the play for the release of a prisoner. And there's nothing she can do about it. So the idea is she's in a rough spot. So Michael's put in the chat is his take on Cressida is that she pledges her love to Troilus, but then betrays him when Diomed comes along. So, and Jen says, yeah, that's correct. She blows in the wind a bit. You know, this is something that I learned from Laura. Laura Sheehan. Yeah, it's a sign of the life of a woman in this world. When she pledges her love to Troilus, but what has happened in her life? She could still love Troilus, and she does prove that she does, even when she's with Diomedes. But what is her life about to become? And what's just happened to her? How true, and if we say, okay, well, she stay true to Troilus? What does that even mean? Right? She is now the property of the Greeks. Her family and her
I guess,
her country people.
can I,
So she was put
sorry,
by the men involved in this and had no choice. So I'm not sure the phrase "as soon as Diomedes comes along" is exactly what's happened to her. She is brought from Troy to the Greek camp by Diomedes. They've had some time for something that we hear later she's promised, and there's been conversation, there's been talk. But again, like Jan just put up, Diomedes can protect her. It's much like many women who find themselves in tough spots in Shakespeare's worlds have to do something to survive. And a lot of that, they have to rely on men in order for that to happen. So we always have to kind of look at the women in these plays and look at what their situations are and what their options really are. And maybe Diomedes was not a bad survivor technique as she was turned over. So let's go to Dennis, then Ben, then Jan, and then we'll go back to Katie. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, that's a sympathetic interpretation of her. On the surface, it looks like she betrays Troilus almost immediately, and that scene where Diomedes takes her back to the Greek camp with the slave, and she's going back and forth. He leaves, and she says, "No, come back," and then he leaves again, and she keeps drawing him back. And I guess that's the only way to be sympathetic with her, is that she was essentially a captive, and she had no choice. She had to. I mean, she could have committed suicide, but to live and survive, I guess she had no choice but to cooperate and befriend Diomedes.
She had to figure out some way, and Diomedes was there. And, you know, maybe we could talk to Jan about casting that role, but certainly you'd want to make him something attractive. You'd want to make him a good choice. And there's got to be some quality about Diomedes. He fell for her pretty quickly too, you know? All right, Ben, go ahead. And then we'll get to Jan and then Katie.
I think that the quotation that you started off with, Jeffrey, was very much to the point. I think the word degree not only refers to military order, but it also refers to human relationships, like when you talk about Cressida and Troilus and Diomedes, because the word degree, if you're a cousin to two different people, let's say, that it is said that you are related to them by the same degree. And so it's also a reference to good order and relationships generally, I think, not just in the military, but between people. Now, as far as Cressida goes, there's also that scene where she arrives in the Greek camp, and you can sort of see it either way. Either she was kissing all the Greek men. Now, either was she being coquettish, or was she being passed around? I guess it depends on your interpretation and how you want to play it. But I think underlying this, and going back to the idea of degree, is that there are rules in both love and in honorable warfare. Cressida herself enunciates some of those rules about how you should deal with men. And it's when the rules of degree and the rules of behavior in either of these two realms are violated that things get a little interesting. And they always are violated. I mean, you know, look at what Achilles did. He had Hector killed when he was unarmed.
And he used an army to do it. He didn't even do it himself.
You're right. He brought in the Myrmidons to do it. And so there's always this clash between the rules that we think should apply and what happens when individual selfishness and motivation becomes involved. And I think this play did a spectacular job of bringing that out. I loved it. I loved the play.
Great. Excellent. Jan.
Hello. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Jeff, and for holding this and for choosing this play. So I had the wonderful opportunity to actually direct this play a few years ago. It was a strange situation. I didn't really have a lot of prep. It was kind of thrown at me. And I, you know, it's a tough one. It's a big one, right? And there was a day when I was invited to speak. I was in a university setting and I was invited to speak to an English class. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, how do I talk to these English students about this play that they haven't read, to get them ready to come see the show? Like, how am I going to talk to them about this? And I realized they knew Hamlet, so I could put it in relation to Hamlet. And as soon as I did that, I could see the play in a nice relief. And this kind of relates to what you were saying, Ben, in terms of the idea of rules in love and war, right? And honor in love and war. And it's really interesting, a few things that Shakespeare's doing. One is he creates this world where an entire world is warring over the love of a woman, Helen. And yet our main characters, Troilus and Cressida, are in love. And yet when it comes time to, you know, give up his love, what does Troilus do? He hand delivers her. He doesn't pick up arms in war. And he even says, I'm true to a fault. And in a way, before it's when they're professing love to each other. And I think what we see is he is true to a fault. He will follow orders and deliver his love to the other side. And what you mentioned too about Achilles, I came into some really challenges with my actors because my actor who is playing Achilles had read all this classical material about these characters, but Shakespeare is changing the characters. He is riffing on these characters and showing them, having them do things they didn't do in classical literature. And I think it's one of the darkest plays of Shakespeare and such a dark treatment of, if we can't have honor in love and war, where is honor? And I just feel like he is, it's so dark and so interesting, the things he's doing. And so like Shakespeare, the idea of the hero, what's the expectation of the hero, right? In Hamlet, he'd take out his sword and he'd kill Claudius right then and there, yet he doesn't, right? He spends the whole play thinking about it or wrestling with it. And in this play, we have these heroes who don't do what we expect. So anyway, it's a great play. I'm so excited to be part of it.
Shakespeare's great at popping expectations that way. Katie, are you still with us to take your second go around? And then I want to go to that scene that Ben mentioned about the kissing of the Greeks when they have Cressida back in their camp for the first time. I don't see or hear Katie. So let me share the screen of that scene, because those of you who've been with us and you see how we work with Capital Classics, you'll know how much time we spend looking at the script, and we look for those clues in how Shakespeare has constructed the page itself and how he's constructed the dialogue and the action of a scene that tells us something about a character. And Ben posed a question: is she being coquettish or is she being dominated in this scene? So I want you to just take a look at what Shakespeare's done here and count the number of men who kiss her as I scroll, and then I'll show you when she finally speaks. Right? So there we go. Enter Cressida and Diomedes. Agamemnon kisses her. Nestor kisses her. Achilles kisses her. After saying, "I'll take that winter from your lips, fair lady," Achilles bids you welcome. So he's saying there's a coldness there, and I'm going to heat you up.
I think it's the winter is Nestor, the old guy.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, it's about Nestor being old.
Get his old, okay.
Yeah.
All right, it could be, yeah. Patroclus steps in, kisses her again, and then she speaks. When Menelaus steps in, right? Menelaus is the reason this whole war is happening. His wife was taken. He gathered the troops and said, "Let's go get her back. I'll have my kiss, sir, lady, by your leave. In kissing, do you render or receive? Both take and give. I'll make my match to live. The kiss you take is better than you give, therefore no kiss." So she starts, again, Shakespeare gives really smart people the ability to rhyme. And whether they're rhyming with themselves or rhyming with another speaker, they're the smart ones to pay attention to in those scenes. They're on top of their language and their thoughts so powerfully that they can pull this off. "I'll give you boot, I'll give you 3 for 1. You are an odd man, give even or give none." "An odd man, lady, every man is odd." "No, Paris is not, for you know 'tis true that you are odd, and he is even with you." So bam, you want to talk about a bam right there. "You fillip me of the head." "No, I'll be sworn." Ulysses steps in. "It were no match or nail against his horns." And now Ulysses takes up her attack on Menelaus as a cuckold. "May I, sweet lady, beg a kiss of you?" "You may." That's the first one she gave permission to out of all those people who already did it.
But she doesn't give permission. She tells him to beg. He says, "May I beg one?" And she says,
right.
"Okay,
I
beg
do
then."
desire it. And Cressida says, "Why beg two?" Right? "Why then, for Venus' sake, give me a kiss when Helen is a maid again and his. I am your debtor, claim it when it's due. Never's my day, and then a kiss of you." And off they go.
And
So-
Helen is a maid again, meaning she's never going to be a virgin
Never.
again.
Yeah.
And right, and so she's taking some power here, but this
Absolutely.
is a very tense scene, and
Absolutely.
she's not, in my reading, she's not being coquettish. She
No, mine
finally
either.
kind of takes some power at the
Yes,
end.
and that's why I wanted to go to this, because I absolutely, and she is in a fraught situation. She doesn't know what these Greeks are going to do with her. She was given over as a prisoner for the release of somebody, a man. She has no idea what they're going to do with her. They could all take turns doing more than kissing her right now. They could kill her right now. She doesn't know. So in terms of getting somebody on her side for what she's about to face, Diomedes, she had time with Diomedes to at least attempt to get him on her side. And maybe she had to make a deal. Now, she doesn't follow through on that deal in that later scene, but she wrestles with it because he could kill her too. If she refuses, he could kill her or turn her over to the troops. There's a lot going on with Cressida in this scene that I think we have to acknowledge the reality that she is wrapped in order to get a good, clear picture of her. Oh, good. Katie's back. Katie, did you have more you wanted to say? I thought I saw your hand up earlier.
Good.
Well, sorry, we're trying to figure out our our Zoom, but I agree that she is not being coquettish at all. I think that she, in this scenario, is just very, I don't want to speak for her and say that she's scared or nervous, but I think that she doesn't want to mess up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, that's part of that interpretation. When we read drama, we are allowed, we're given permission to interpret people's state of minds and emotional states. That's part of the fun of reading drama, is we get to do it. We don't have a narrator here describing Cressida's inner thinking as she goes through this scene. All we have is what's happened, the situation she's in, what the people around her are doing to her, and what she says and maybe does in response to it. We get to then imagine, deeply feel some compassion and empathy for that human being in that situation, and get some results from that exploration of our own empathy and compassion for a person in this situation, having things done to her, what having done to her. But that's why there's book clubs about this, right? We get to talk about this and bring insight and ideas to each other that we might not have thought of ourselves without somebody else's interpretation.
Well, that's most of the fun of being part of this group, is that what do we have, 24 people online right now, and
Yeah.
24 completely separate opinions. So that's the fun part of listening to other people's opinions.
That's right. And it opens up the idea for thought and discussion. And you'll know from our work here that the goal of what we do is always go back to the text and always go back and see what the play says, for us to strengthen our thoughts, to inform further our understanding. It is important to always go back to what the play says. All right, so there's a couple of things here. Let's see, how does this play? Certainly, we'll get to that. It plays great, Jan answered. Complex. And they say her beauty rivals Helen, so I think Diomedes is struck by her beauty. He is immediately upon seeing her. Certainly, Pandarus speaks to her beauty. And then when he sees the men passing her around and getting angry, he steps in and really saves her life. He certainly steps in and stops something from happening there. And that's a part of where their connection comes from. Dennis asks, doesn't she have some power because her father is on the Greek side? Or is he complicit? Well, it was the father who, he has been in the Greek camp, but he's the one who set up the negotiation and the deal making. You guys have wanted my daughter for a long time, and we've said no. Well, now we're going to say yes if you give back, was it Antenor? Is that who it was? I always lose track of how to pronounce these guys' names.
Yes, Jeff.
Thank you, Michael. So he's floating between, I don't know how much power he has in the Greek camp, you know. Yeah, Jan said he doesn't seem to have any power, particularly where Cressida is concerned. And Michael, I think Ulysses has Cressida a number for sluttish spoils of opportunity and daughters of the game. Michael doesn't think much of Cressida. And the Greeks are showing their power over the Trojans symbolically by kissing her. That's an interesting thought, Dennis. Yeah, that they're taking this opportunity. Daughters of the game refers to her being a whore, but she's not actually a whore, no. And again, these are men saying this. It doesn't make her one. We have to look at her actions and what she's done. Yeah, like Ben says, maybe the way to understand Cressida at all times is self-preservation. Again, always go back to the play and look at the circumstances she finds herself in. Even in the scene where Troilus is wooing her, she doesn't jump in right away. And, you know, I'm going to get us to that scene too, because there's something, again, when we look at how Shakespeare lays things out for us, let me find that. Act 3, Scene 2. I love this examination of this scene. So this is the bringing together of Troilus and Cressida, right? And we see it start out. Pandarus is almost always in prose with his comedic relief. Then Troilus comes in, speaks in poetry, Pandarus in prose, Troilus in poetry. So we can see who's taking this a bit more seriously. Pandarus in prose, Troilus in poetry, lots of Pandarus. And then Cressida enters, Pandarus exits. And it's all prose. This whole opening part between Cressida and Troilus is prose. So there's a lightness to it, maybe even some comedic moments as they banter back and forth, as they negotiate their date, because they know what's expected of them tonight. They both wanted it to some degree. She's holding out. Again, we can interpret why. They're talking about love and lovers throughout all this, but again, it's prose. So it doesn't have that same sense of seriousness and passion. Pandarus comes back in. What? Blushing still? Have you not done talking yet? This is not done. Well, uncle, what folly I commit, I dedicate to you. It's still all prose until Cressida here. And her opening line is, boldness comes to me now and brings me heart. What a great opening line to kick into poetry. And up the ante of the scene, up the passion of the scene, up the importance of what's happening in the scene by shifting into poetry at that moment and giving Cressida such a great line to say. Boldness comes to me now and brings me heart. Prince Troilus, I have loved you night and day for many weary months. Why was my Cressida then so hard to win? If she was a whore, would she be so hard to win by somebody she loves? Hard to seem won, but I was won, my lord, with the first glance that ever, pardon me, if I confess much, you will play the tyrant. I love you now, but till now not so much, but I might master it. In faith, I lie. My thoughts were like unbridled children grown too headstrong for their mother. See, we fools, why have I blabbed? Who shall be true to us when we are so unsecret to ourselves? But though I loved you well, I wooed you not. And yet, good faith, I wished myself a man, or that we women had men's privilege of speaking first. Sweet, bid me hold my tongue, for in this rapture I shall surely speak the thing I shall repent. See, your silence, cunning and dumbness from my weakness draws my very soul of counsel. Stop my mouth, and shall, albeit sweet music, issues thence, and they kiss. What a great explosion of that opening part of the scene as they're figuring things out, figuring out who's who, figuring out what they think about love, what the other person thinks about love. It's terrific. And then we see once Pandarus begins to speak here, it's back to some prose. Cressida goes back to poetry. And then Cressida and Troilus finish the scene up, both speaking poetry. Counterpoint to Pandarus's prose, in which he finishes the scene with a poetic couplet. So it even gets him going. So again, as we follow the structure that Shakespeare gives us, we get a really great idea of what he wants us to understand about the mental and emotional journey of the characters. And he lays it out for us there by his choices of the writing style, the linguistic style he uses. And it just makes the arc of the scene beautiful. And again, when we go back to that scene and we go back to the play itself, we get a better understanding than maybe that first go of who Cressida is and what she's dealing with in this world. You know, or that we women had men's privilege of speaking first. So that tells us a little bit about how she sees this world too. All right, so any more we want to say about Cressida? This was great. I had her set to the side. I didn't know if we'd get to her tonight, and Katie kicked us right off, didn't she? Dennis, is that a new hand up or the old one?
Oh, it's an old hand, not about Cressida, but can we go back to the comment on degree?
Sure, absolutely.
I generally agree with everyone, and the degree could also be the rule of law, the societal norms, and accepted norms of society, and that Ulysses says that's broken down, and that's the problem why we're not successful.
Yep.
And it reminds me of Oberon and Titania in Midsummer Night's Dream. When they were fighting, the whole natural world was set upside down. The seasons were off and everything.
Yeah, nature wasn't operating the way it was supposed to.
And also in Julius Caesar, while his assassination was being plotted, strange things were happening with the comet, I guess, and dogs barking.
That's right. And the same thing in Macbeth, too, on the night of the evening of Duncan's murder. It was one of my favorite lines in Macbeth, when Macbeth hears about all the crazy stuff and the horses and the winds blowing things and all this crazy stuff in nature. All Macbeth says is, it was a wild night.
It's a recurring theme, and I equate it to the current situation in this country, where we cannot agree on facts and truth. The society will come apart. We're losing our degree.
Yep. And if you look at what's happening with nature, you know, we've ascribed it scientifically to global warming, but you know, Shakespeare would have said Oberon and Titania are fighting, or these are omens to some degree here, when we've got floods and storms and fires and droughts and all kinds of rising. I mean, it says in this play that the seas will rise above the shores and make sop of this very land. And this is something that we're all seeing happen, but we've chosen science instead of omens of our own human behavior. And
great insight. We need to listen to Ulysses.
Right.
And pay attention to degree in science.
Yeah. It's where am I here? Where am I going? Yep. And that's our first introduction to the Greeks, is that conversation happening there. Yeah, the order of man was a big thing for the Elizabethans, and that structure of how things are supposed to go in nature was key. Rachel, I see your hand up there. Hi, Rachel.
Thank you for letting me come to this. I'm here in Virginia,
absolutely.
and we had a discussion group, and then everyone decided that they were too zoomed out during the day, so we stopped listening.
Well, welcome.
So thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really interested in this idea of the order of man, and I think there's also the implication that within the Elizabethan structure, there's a family component of that as well. The idea that like the husband had to be in control of his household. And I find it really interesting that Ulysses uses the terms of appetite, and then he has this doubling of power that then eats itself. I think there's something associated with like unnatural reproduction, and in the sense that like the marriage at the end of a comedy guarantees that the happiness will continue. I think having this in the first act suggests that we're heading towards a romantic union that will not continue, and it will end up in this whole play kind of eating itself in that way.
Oh my God, that's awesome. What a great use of the metaphors there. Yeah, that's exactly what does happen. Exactly what happens in this. Really, that's great. Thank you, Rachel. Anybody want to jump off that and talk about that? Oh, Herb, go ahead, Herb.
I was just going to point out that there is a lot of
good side conversation in the chat if you wanted to refer to that, if there was a pause or a break or anything, Jeff, to see if there's something you wanted to pull out or touch on.
Okay, I think we brought that up to, let's see. All right, well, we start talking about the characters, talking about Ulysses and his stance. He infuriated, he was humiliated in front of the men. So what I found interesting, because our theme for this is this passion for power, and a lot of what we examined in the first several plays were people going all out to pursue some power in this. But so much of what I found in this play, looking at it through that lens, was how much a loss of power played out in this play. And the reactions to that. I found that really fascinating. And it was so much of trying to kind of hold on or see what was happening in individual worlds and larger worlds as power just kept being lost, whether it was taken or whether somebody didn't want to participate in it anymore, or was trying to gain power back a different way. Like Barbara was saying earlier, by not participating in it, does that give Achilles any power in his world? It was fascinating to me how many people throughout the course of this play were losing power that they had once had, which was pretty interesting stuff. So so we're talking about, I figured Michael would like Thucydides. We'll go to Thucydides in a second. We'll get back to the chat. Thank you for keeping an eye on that, Herb. Does anybody have anything more they want to say about order? Robert, go ahead. Robert Wilson.
The discussion about order is interesting. The issue I had was, what is the purpose of power? Why do people accumulate power? And you could think about order. There's a need for order so everybody knows their place. But for what purpose is it being served? In this particular case, it is the wife is stolen from the Greeks and goes to Troy. And so the purpose supposedly of power is to reclaim her, but that purpose is inadequate. And so the question is does disorder come from not having any real legitimate purpose, or is it that there is no legitimate purpose and then disorder follows from that? So this relates a bit to what you just said, Jeff, but it's one of the questions that I have. Power for what purpose? Yeah. Why do people? So there are instances of domination. One person wants to dominate another. But if we think of the power as an idea of being able to act, the idea of purpose is not very clear.
That's great. What you were just talking about reminded me of the idea of dissonance. In a structure, especially music, is where we see dissonance a lot. And the idea of dissonance is that the structure of that song and the structure of musical harmony is pulled apart, so that each of these parts then act somewhat individually. And in their acting individually for their own purpose, dissonance is created. But there's an energy in that dissonance that as it goes, that there's kind of this natural pull to bring it back into harmony. But the journey from harmony to dissonance to harmony again is something that can be exciting, that we can feel it on a visceral level and an intuitive level, even if we don't rationally or reasonably understand what is happening. And there's something about this play where everybody's acting singularly. Achilles is not following the rules. And then they start to have to do things in other ways to get things back. This dissonance has just exploded in this world. And there's this pull to get it back into harmony. And I think what Rachel was pointing out earlier was absolutely terrific. This play does not reharmonize the world by its end. It's just still kind of crashing into each other as they're trying to grab a hold of some structure there. But the passions and the hurts and the what's being driven there has not been resolved by the end of this play. And with dissonance, we want that resolve. We want that the return to harmony out of dissonance. Otherwise, we're left still feeling like, ah. And I think this play might do that to us. Michael Clements.
Yeah. Am I? Yeah, I'm on. Yeah. When talking about the dissonances, I don't know if this shows up so much, but in the Riverside edition, right before the play, that shows that the medieval stringed order and all that stuff. It just sort of speaks to, if anybody has access to the Riverside, it's really cool. It talks about the universe as God's stringed instruments. So it doesn't.
Oh, wow. Oh, there you go. Yep. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So let's talk about Thersites. Michael, why don't you kick us off with Thersites, and we'll see who else wants to join in.
Well, the one scene towards the end of the play where they're fighting, was it Hector is going after him, saying, "No, I'm an idiot. I can't remember the exact words."
Hector stumbles upon him. Yeah.
Don't go after me. I'm worthless. I'm a piece of crap. So he's honest. He's also what's the word I'm looking for? A coward. But he's a realist. Hey, I'll say whatever I need to say. He's a survivor.
He's the clown. He's the clown.
He's the clown figure in this.
But he's more of a. He's
not always speak.
He reminds me of Appomattox. He reminds me of time of Athens. He's the cynic. He's the misanthrope. He's just I don't like anybody, so I like him. No, I'm kidding about that.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely the clown comedic figure in the play, but he's got his own idea of what the truth of that world is. It'd be interesting to study more to see how reflective of some truth is. What I found about him in thinking of this idea of power, that he is actually one of the most powerful people in this play because he's not a part of the order. He owes nobody anything. And he's not beholden to anybody. He is not under anybody's order, really. He does a couple of things they tell him to do. He's like, yeah, okay, I'll go do that. I'll go deliver this message. But he delivers it his way. He always takes the time to comment and speak what his mind about what's going on in his world. And he just seems out of the desired structure of that world. And by being out of it, I just saw him as having an incredible amount of power. And the one time he seems to not is when it comes to that physical strength that Barbara had mentioned early on, that this play is driven a lot by the idea of power is might makes right, that old philosophy that if I'm stronger than you or a better fighter than you and I can beat you in a physical combat, that makes me right. The rest of the time, he gets his stuff in. Ajax whacks him around a few times, but he doesn't stop. He doesn't stop, and I admire that so much.
He outsmarts them. He outsmarts the strength, though.
Oh my God, he's got this great line. Hold on, I gotta find it because I marked it. I love this line. Where Ajax is whacking him around, he won't stop. Achilles comes in and says, "What's happening?" And Ajax says, "Therefore I beat thee." And Thersites says, "No. What modicums of wit?" He utters, "I have bobbed his brain more than he has beaten my bones." So to Barbara's take on this strength, Thersites said, no. That's not power. I've got power.
I think it's Thersites.
Thersites, is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, thank you. Yep. He's like, no, I got power. I got power in my wit. And I beat you at that. So I too loved Thersites in this. Yeah. Anybody else? Robert Wilson, go ahead.
Yeah, I was intrigued by this character, and I did a little bit of reading. So these are not my ideas, but they did resonate with me.
Yeah.
And the argument was that Thucydides was a device. He's outside, Jeff, as you just said, so he's not part of the story, but he speaks truth. And so in a way, this is a way for the author, for Shakespeare, to speak truth, but not to be quite so offensive because everybody associates him with a despicable character, a character that is unhealthy. And so truth is out, but we're not going to pay very much attention to it because this is not. And this article was claiming this was kind of more or less the role of Tricidy in the Iliad also, that this has become a character that we shows up elsewhere. And I didn't pursue that.
Yeah, it is true. The role of the clown, I actually did some writing on this, and I developed a bit of a performance off of the idea of the role of the clown throughout theater history. It goes way, way back to the Greeks, through the Romans, into Renaissance. But that role of the clown, the purpose, once and always, is speaking truth to power. And in some way, when there was the witty fools, the witty jesters of the courts, that's what part of their entertainment was. As long as you entertained the majesty, you could pick at everybody else in the court and point things out, push those buttons, and it didn't matter how mad they got as long as the crown stood behind you. And we see that quite often in Shakespeare's Fools, where as long as the person in power backs them, you're good to go. Michael Clements.
Just getting back to Thucydides, I have this little, it's called Outlines of Shakespeare's Plays. And so it outlines the plays. So it just gives a little, 2-page, synopsis, but it describes the characters. And Thucydides here is described as a deformed, and then it goes on, scurrilous, knave, and all this other stuff. But in the text, I can't remember. Is he deformed? Does he have some sort of physical deformity?
I don't recall that. Ajax is somehow, I don't recall that. And the way we cast it and played it was that he was kind of sprightly and nimble. But I don't recall that he had a deformity.
I don't remember seeing that either. I mean, he's called all kinds of names. He's insulted like crazy throughout the play. Now, there's one where they're just going back. What's the scene where he's with somebody, Jane? You might remember this, where they're just going back and forth, calling each other name after name after name after. They're actually having a conversation, and they're finding out information. But in every single line, they insult each other while they're doing it.
Yeah, so is that Ajax? I think
probably.
So and then it ends. I think it ends with that fight that they had before Achilles walks in.
So it's not just a bantering wit. It's not just an insult competition. They have this conversation where information is important, but as the information is being delivered and revealed and asked for, every line has some name they're calling each other, and a new one every line. It was brilliant. It was absolutely fantastically brilliant. Anybody else on Thucydides? Any thoughts on his role or who he was, or whether you liked him or not, whether you appreciated what he did for that world, his idea of power, anything in there? A very dark, cynical, as was said, clown. He outsmarts physical strength, like Falstaff and Henry plays. Yep, very much. And then Dennis quotes Falstaff, discretion is the better part of valor. Yep. All right. So I can throw some things out there for us to talk about. Does anybody have something some chum they want to throw to the
just as an aside, if I could throw some chum.
Yeah.
I do have some videotaped scenes from my production, which was at the university here near Hartford, one thing to keep in mind if you go click through them, which I'll put the address in the chat. If you're interested, please go anytime. But the casting, I wasn't in part of the casting, but it was very gender bending. So Achilles was a woman, Agamemnon was a woman, like a lot of the guys, Menelaus was a woman, Helen was played by a man. So there was a lot of gender bending, which I probably wouldn't have chosen to do, but it was very, very interesting. So it might be jarring if you watch it because it will be very unexpected, but I would welcome you, if you like this play, to check it out just because it's fun to hear the words out loud. But anyway,
throw
so
it
I'll
up
put
in
the
the
address in the
chat.
chat.
Yes. Michael Clemens said, I did a quick Google on Thersites, and he is described in Troilus and Cressida as deformed, etc. Yeah, it could be just one of those comments that's in there that I didn't catch this time through. It could be in there, one of those one-offs that people will hold on to create a character. All right, so thank you for that, Jan. So one of the aspects of power, and again, it was the fear of or the actual losing of this that I found interesting. I'll see if I can get that shared up on the screen again. The problem is when I do that, I lose so many of you guys. I don't get to see you. So it's this one where they're talking about who should fight, who should take up Hector's challenge. And of course, it should be Achilles, right? The biggest and baddest guy. But Ulysses and Nestor have a different idea. And I found here that they were talking at the end of this about a certain power being in reputation and opinion. And what that means, how does that enable them to hold on to power? So, where is everybody left by this point? Yeah, all but Ulysses and Nestor exit, and Ulysses calls Nestor over. I have a young conception in my brain. Be you my time to bring it to my shape. So they're talking about here, blunt wedges rive hard knots, the seated pride that hath to this maturity blown up in rank Achilles must or now be cropped, or shedding breed a nursery of like evil to overbulk us all. So this idea of pride is being a problem. So Nestor says, why 'tis most meet, who may you else oppose that can from Hector bring his honor off, if not Achilles? Though it be a sportful combat, yet in the trial much opinion dwells. For here the Trojans taste our dearest repute with their finest palate. And trust to me, Ulysses, our imputation shall be oddly poised in this vile action. For the success, although particular, shall give a scantling of good or bad unto the general. And in such indexes, although small pricks to their subsequent volumes, there is seen the baby figure of the giant mass of things to come at large. It is supposed he that meets Hector issues from our choice. And choice, being mutual act of all our souls, makes merit her election and doth boil, as 'twere from forth us all, a man distilled out of our virtues, who, miscarrying, what heart receives from hence a conquering part, to steal a strong opinion to themselves, which entertain limbs are his instruments in no less working than our swords and bows directive by the limbs. And Ulysses says, give pardon in my speech, therefore 'tis meet Achilles meet not Hector. Let us like merchants first show foul wares, and think perchance they'll sell. If not, the luster of the better shall exceed by showing the worse first. Do not consent that ever Hector and Achilles meet, for both our honor and our shame in this are dogged with two strange followers. What are they? what glory our Achilles shares from Hector, were he not proud, we all should share with him. But already he is too insolent, and it were better parch in Afric's son than in the pride and salt scorn of his eye should he escape Hector fair. If he were foiled, why then we do our main opinion crush in taint of our best man. And then they go on to do something else. So it's very apparent there that they're very concerned about what a loss of reputation or diminished opinion of their power can do to their ability to execute this battle and maintain some sense of status in the eyes of their enemies. So we'll go to Ben and then Barbara. I see your hands now that I've opened up the screen again.
And the line that you read in there, Jeff, basically where they refer to merchants not showing their best merchandise first, kind of relates back to Cressida when she first enunciated the rules, where she said, don't seem overeager when you're dealing with a man. You have to be aware of the effect you're going to have on their appetite. And so in a way, these are both power relations. They are a way to get an advantage over another person, whether reputationally or in terms of playing hard to get. And it is power. I mean, it's not fighting, but it is a way to get power. And that is in maybe you'll get to the following scene where Ulysses, the master of manipulation, tries a lot of different things on Achilles to try to manipulate him and mold his views, and finally at the end of it warns him, you're going to look like a laughing stock if if you love Priam's daughter, but Priam's son, how's it going to look if you kill Priam's, you get killed by Priam's son and you're in love with his daughter, something like that. But
something along the lines of they'll think that's why. They'll think that's why you lost.
And it comes at the end of a number of little tricks that Ulysses is trying to pull, all of which have to do with getting power over Achilles and getting him and bending the will of Achilles.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Ben. Barbara?
Earlier when you asked about why would someone seek power, or why do they all want power? And I think that there are several places in the play, especially Act 3, Scene 3, throughout. Let me see. Ulysses, and then Achilles, and then Ulysses again talks about the fact that, and it starts with the idea of pride and reputation, as you said. And we all identify, or it even says here that we identify ourselves through what other people say about us and what we see reflected. So Ulysses knows that and talks about the fact that Achilles is, has established his identity built on his idea of being a heroic warrior. And by his seeing someone else step into that role, such as Ajax, he will not have that kind of reflection from the people. Hence, when they went by his tent and just ignored him and it was driving him crazy, how come they're not paying attention to him? And Ulysses then also says later on that, we only, we can only establish who we are through what other people communicate to us. So I think those people who need to identify themselves as a powerful person seek power to identify themselves with something. Does that make sense?
Totally. That was one of the notes that I had taken on here, is that idea of status. In order for it to be real, it needs to be acknowledged by somebody else.
Right.
You can't kind of have status under yourself. You need somebody else on the other side of that relationship to acknowledge your status in order for you to have it.
Which also goes back to the hierarchy, which also goes back to the whole hierarchy.
Right on.
You know, the top power, and then the next one, then the next one,
That's
all
right.
the way down to the bottom.
Yep.
So if you don't maintain that, if you don't have that identity, then you've lost your rung of the ladder, so to speak.
Right on. Yep. And I think a ladder is one of the metaphors they've used in this, in terms of that idea of structure there. I think a ladder was used at one point as a metaphor. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anybody else want to talk about status as power? Jan.
I just think it's interesting to see Thersites, the fact that he has such a low status gives him the ability to speak in the way that he does, sort of speaking truth to power, because he's so non-threatening, you know what I mean, in many ways. He has no power, and yet his power is the words. And he so yeah, that's an interesting, and I think that's true, right? When the clown is the low status character.
Always.
And therefore is able to say things that nobody else can say. But
Yep. Anybody else about opinion, reputation, status as power? We certainly see that played out over and over and over again, where for public figures, opinion matters more than substance. Opinion is how they hold on to a certain power when their acts don't mesh, don't harmonize. About discord and harmony. Again, when their acts are not in harmony with opinion, they choose opinion for their power.
Jeffrey, you know, one of the ways, and I think this came up in the sections that Barb was just talking about, that is shown. In other words, that you have to see your status reflected by other people. There's a lot of references to vision and eyesight and seeing and spectacles, not only there, but in the whole play. You know, this thing about how two people are looking into each other's eyes and they see the reflection, and it wasn't just this. I thought I picked it up in a lot of parts of the play, and I didn't make notes of them, so I can't really comment on it other than to say that seemed to be kind of a little motif that Shakespeare was using in this play. You know, sight, vision.
Yep.
You know, whether you or Jan maybe have come into this, looked at this.
I have not. I did not pick up on that. So thanks for sharing that. But that's again a big part of what can you see certain things. You know, they talk about people having visions, and of course, we're blessed in this play by Cassandra, who has visions that are absolutely right, and because of her situation, nobody believes it. Nobody puts any stock or power in the power she does possess. And she calls it again and again. There's that argument about whether or not to continue fighting, or for Hector to go out and do the fight, right? When they're debating whether to do that, and Cassandra comes in and sees the entire downfall of Troy if Hector goes out and fights. And I think one of the brothers says, so Does our sister's visions and dreams make any difference to you? Nope. Nope, not at all. Not at all. So that idea of vision, yeah, Hector's wife, Andromache, says she's had a dream that night. So yeah, different types of visions, different ways of seeing truths and realities. But again, whether or not they're acknowledged is whether they have any power in this.
Yeah.
Lou.
Yeah, that's a real good point, to be able to see things in a different way and to look at them and see the diversity. So it's not only exciting, but it gets you to see more of what you have and what you don't have, and to get past, like get past your pride and your idealism, and then see the excitement of the more full scope. And that is in all the diversity, which is so helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are blessed being outside this world, right? And that's how we get to see the diversity. Everybody in this place fairly locked in to their way of thinking and seeing and behaving. But we get the benefit of being able to see that diversity of power and vision and thoughts. Dennis, is that a new hand?
Yeah, it just occurred to me, what in the history, I think we had an expert here, maybe Kate, in the history, what happened to Helen and Cressida? What was their fate after the war was over? Does anybody know?
I'm trying to think. I think Helen was brought back with Menelaus, wasn't she? Wasn't she captured after the defeat of Troy? When they brought in the Trojan horse and unleashed everybody and the Greeks defeated Troy, wasn't she recaptured and brought back with Menelaus?
Yeah, and there was an ancient Greek play, maybe it was Sophocles, called The Helen, which was a very anti-war. If it's the one I'm thinking of, it showed what the Trojans, especially the women, who came back as slaves to the Greeks, went through.
I think that's called the Trojan women, is it not?
Well, there are several. It may be the Trojan women.
I've not heard of the Helen. Yeah, I've not heard of the Helen.
But whichever it was, she survived the war. Cressida, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I found it very interesting, Hector's speech, where they were discussing the merits of giving Helen back.
Yeah.
And it seemed like Hector was saying, yeah, this is not really worth it. We need to give her back.
Yeah.
Well, that would have gone against the history, but and he didn't have power to hold the day. His family convinced him, no, we've got to go forward and
Paris wasn't quitting.
Yeah.
He wasn't giving up that trophy so easily. That's for sure.
Hector didn't have much power as far as political power.
Right. Yeah. Barb, is that a new hand?
Yeah, I just wanted to go along with what Ben said about the vision and seeing.
Yeah.
Because it's Act 4, last scene, I'm not sure, when Achilles and Hector meet, and Achilles says, I shall forestall thee, Lord Ulysses, thou. Now, Hector, I have fed mine eyes on thee. I have with exact view perused thee, Hector, and quoted joint by joint. And Hector says, is this Achilles? I am Achilles. Stand fair, I pray thee, let me look on thee. Behold thy fill. I mean, talk about being taken up. Nay, I have done already. Thou art too brief. I will the second time, as I would by thee, view thee limb by limb. And Hector says, oh, like a book of sport, thou read me o'er, but there's more in me than thou understandst. Why dost thou so oppress me with thine eyes? And then it goes on, but it's the whole idea of they're looking at each other, and sort of makes me think of like fowl that are going to fight each other and they puff up their breasts to try to seem bigger. And it does have to do with this outward appearance, how you come across to the other person.
Yep, great. That's a great selection, Barb, to connect with Ben's point about the idea of seeing and looking and what we get from that. Yeah, thank you for that. Ben, is that a new hand or the same
Yeah,
one?
just not to belabor this, but
no, go ahead.
Back in 3.3, scene 3.3, Achilles' speech, it starts on about line 98 in my volume, where it's Achilles and Ulysses, and Achilles is trying to have some kind of a comeback to what Ulysses is saying, and Achilles says, "This is not strange, Ulysses. The beauty that is born here in the face, the bearer knows not, but commends itself to others' eyes, nor doth the eye itself, that most pure spirit of sense, behold itself, not going from itself, but eye to eye opposed, salutes each other with each other's form. For speculation, which is in my version here, it's equated with the word sight. For speculation turns not to itself till it hath traveled and is mirrored there where it may see itself." So there's all this about reflection, vision, how you are seen by others. And it's a theme that, sometimes you read in comments about these plays, well, you have to look at the clothing and you have to look at whatever. And this seemed to be the eyesight play as far as I could tell.
Nice. Very nice. Rachel.
Ben, your comment made me think of that speech that we looked at earlier with Cressida. And I was thinking about Cassandra and everybody who sees things but then is not believed, and how in this play, sight is often, they don't trust it, or it shouldn't be trusted.
Ooh, nice.
Because I was thinking about 3:2, where Cressida says, "Hard to seem one, but I was one, my lord, with the first glance that ever, pardon me, if I confess much, you will play the tyrant." And then she says, "In faith, I lie." This idea that sight might convey a sort of like honesty that they can't own to, or that shouldn't be trusted because everyone is playing each other.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah. What a great way that they picked up on that themselves and then use it for their own power. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. Terrific. Let's see, in the chat, I see Katie said, "Can you touch on the hows and whys of Elizabethan's fascination with Roman and Greek society?" Yeah, that's actually a fairly easy one. In their basic fundamental education, they studied Latin. And in part of that study of Latin language, which the religious ceremonies were spoken, we use Latin to deliver. So Latin was still a very influential language in the legal and religious and education world of the Elizabethan era. And so part of that study was reading the old Roman stories and the old Roman plays that existed, which then always connect, and the Roman myths, which then always connect to the Greek myths, because a lot of them were offshoots from that over time. So it was just part of their regular education, was exposure to these stories. And then I wish Mila was here to clarify this for me, but at one point it was deemed against the law to refer to a Christian god in a dramatic play that was not a biblical play or a mystery play or a play about a biblical story. That if it was just kind of your regular public play like Shakespeare writes, it was forbidden to refer to the Christian God in it. So in order to have that power above, they used and referred to the Roman gods, because they were able to do that. Don't wait for me. So so that was a big part of that presence in there. Let's see what else might be in there. Jan posted up some clips. Dennis posted another gender bender production from the Maryland Shakespeare Players. Globes. Oh, and then, so good. Somebody found that play. Jan found that play Ben was talking about. It was a Euripides drama about Helen. I guess it's called Helen. Yeah. Oh, I never heard of that. That's wild. Great. I thought I knew all the plays that were extant from that time. Great. I got a new one to read. Thank you. All right. Anything else before I throw another thing out there? Rachel, there's also 300 years of solely religious dramatic performance. So we're looking for ideas. They find a lot of inspiration in Greek trauma and take up similar topics and forms. Absolutely, Rachel. Yeah, thank you for that. Yep, it gave them some freedom of stories that they didn't have for those centuries where the only story they were allowed to tell were biblical and religious stories. And suddenly, as the Renaissance spread its way across Europe, and they opened up to these stories about life as people outside the strictures of Scripture. Also to remember that the Romans ruled England for a while there, for a couple hundred years, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember exactly how much time the Romans were in London and ruled them. So some of that culture I'm sure was left behind. All right, so and then Ellen posts, I believe Helen returned to Sparta with Menelaus after the Trojan War, and they had some happy years together. Great, thank you, Ellen. That's what we were thinking, yeah. So one more thing I'd like to throw at us. We mentioned it earlier. Let me get it going here to share with you. And this is the idea of a loss of power being something critical in this play. And this is Act 3, Scene 3, for those of you reading along at home. And it is the scene that Ben was talking about earlier with Ulysses manipulating, setting up all these, pass by his tents, ignore him, say hi to his friend, but not him. And then Achilles, where are we here? 380. Did I pass it? Yeah, I way past it. There we go. Here it is. Okay, let me get that on for us. So Act 3, Scene 3, starting around line 71 or 72. After all this stuff has happened, after Ajax basically ignores Achilles, and Achilles asks, what mean these fellows? Know they not Achilles? Don't they remember who I am, right? And Patroclus says, they pass by strangely. They were used to bend, to send their smiles before them to Achilles, to come as humbly as they used to creep to holy altars. So they used to treat you like a god, and they never showed up without smiling and bending their knees in supplication to you. And Achilles says, what, am I poor of late? 'Tis certain greatness, once fallen out with fortune, must fall out with men too. What the declined is, he shall as soon read in the eyes of others as feel in his own fall. There's that vision and needing somebody else to give them that status again. For men like butterflies show not their mealy wings, but to the summer. And not a man for being simply man hath any honor, but honor for those honors that are without him, as places, riches, and favor, prizes of accident as oft as merit, which when they fall as being slippery slanders, the love that leaned on them as slippery too, doth one pluck down another, and together die in the fall. So when those things that love leaned on, those things outside you as a person, when love was on you because of those things, and those things fall because love was leaning on those things, admiration was leaning on those things, well, that admiration is going to fall down too, and both will die. And then he tries to turn it around. But 'tis not so with me. Fortune and I are friends. I do enjoy at ample point all that I did possess, save these men's looks. Again, that vision. who do methinks find out something not worth in me such rich beholding as they have often given. And then he goes to Ulysses. So there. So that sense of losing reputation, losing status, losing power. What is power? Is it something within you or something without you? And does it require other people to see it and acknowledge it for it to be real? Is kind of wrapped up in that scene right there. Jan?
The power is bestowed upon you by outsiders. And and also that whole scene is a setup. They do that, they enact this so that Ulysses can come at the end, and they're really trying to goad Achilles into picking up his sword again.
Right. And they're also trying to break that pride that they spoke about earlier. He was getting too proudful. And again, that sense of dissonance we talked about, the individual pulled out of the structure and went his own way. They're like, oh man, and like Ulysses says, if this continues, this is going to infect everybody. So they're trying to pop his bubble and inspire him to rejoin the group, rejoin the harmony of the army and fight for their cause because he's just acting on his own. Yep. Do you want to finish your thought there, Jan, about the manipulating him?
No, I think that's it. I think that it's a setup, and he kind of falls for it.
Yep.
You know, he gets roped back in based on this conversation.
Yep.
You know, and it's effective, but it's everything you said is
play
great.
acting, right? It's theater for a purpose. Yeah, definitely play acting. And again, he has to see it. That was this whole point. Let's walk by his tent and make sure he sees this. He sees us behaving this way toward him and around him.
Right.
So
and
that
they're elevating, in this moment, they're elevating Ajax, who is like, Ajax. Like, I could flick him over with one finger. Ajax, he's not. So it's like they're appealing to his sense of pride and just like not being displaced by Ajax. There's not enough honor in that.
And it's interesting how pride then has two sides to that coin. If it's pride, and we see this a lot in Shakespeare's plays, where you can do the same action, but if it's to serve the greater good, it's seen as heroic. If it is to serve your own selfish purposes, it is seen as villainous. Right? That's Macbeth is all about that. It starts out, oh, brave Macbeth. He went in and tore through these armies, and the description of his violence is incredible, but it's heroic because it's for Scotland. Then later, when he does similar atrocities, and they're for his purposes, it's villainous and monstrous. So again, that perception, but it's about who are you serving. So when Achilles' pride is what it is, but it's only serving him, it's a problem. But they need his pride for the greater good of the Greeks to get out there and fight on the fields and join this fight back. Otherwise, they're not going to defeat the Trojans. And it's a problem. Go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to say it's the same thing on Wall Street. It's the same company one day and the next day, but one day it's worth nothing, and the next day, because perceptions have changed, it's worth multiple millions of dollars.
Yeah. And their employees still make $11 an hour.
Right.
The company still might fold.
That didn't change.
That's not changing. No. Lou, it's knowing within, if not shown without. Yep, that's very true. You know, that sense of value. And I think that's a lot of what Shakespeare explores in many of his plays is where do we find our human value? Where do we find our self-strength? And it always does come back to finding it within rather than the opinion and perception of others. We see a lot of disaster when people pursue the perception of others rather than their own substance. I think there was a question there. I think was Shakespeare's motivation to make an anti-heroic version of the story, is Dennis's question. I think it's related to the society, what was happening in 1601. I think we're missing Millerigio at this point. This is when she usually jumps in with her historical knowledge and Shakespeare's connection to those things. I'm not as versed in what was happening politically in 1601. That's when I would turn and say, Miller, do you know this? And again, when we get into trouble when we ask what Shakespeare's purpose was, right? We can make connections between some facts that we know, but those connections are speculative on our part. It's a lot of fun to do, and I love doing it too. Take some facts that we do know, connect them with speculative imagination. It's a fun exercise. But again, knowing what Shakespeare's goal was, knowing what his intent was, at this point, without his diary, it's fairly impossible to say for certain what he had in mind, because he didn't leave those
the
writings
plays
behind.
get very dark in the Jacobean period, and that it looks like King James took over in 1603 as Elizabeth died.
Somewhere around
So
the
I
year
don't.
1603
I'm
or
just
4,
googling
yeah.
it right now. But so
Yeah.
I think I would just be interested to see what the heck was going on, because I just think he's really pointedly saying something so strongly, so vehemently with this play, and I just wonder what it is he's responding to.
Right. We can have faith that there is something, because he's always done that. And that's what is great about having Miller join us for these things, is she knows those connections. And time and time and time again, his plays are responding to something that he sees happening in his life, which is really cool. Let's see a couple things in here. Somebody's Edwin, 1601. Devereux stages a short-lived rebellion against Elizabeth I. Is executed and beheaded. Is that the one that Shakespeare's company was questioned for? Was that the rebellion they did Richard II the night before and were hauled in for questioning as to why? That's it. Yeah. Yep. There was a siege of Kinsale ending the 9 Years' War. So a long war. I'm not familiar with the 9 Years' War, but it seems that that's just about the same amount of time that the Trojans and Greeks were fighting at this point in time in the story. Elizabeth addresses her final parliament with the Golden Speech, Act of Relief of the Poor, Essex Rebellion. And then Rachel posts a lot of his plays at this time are concerned with inheritance and continuity of rule and the possible chaos. A lot of fear around who will take over if no one decides, if there's not a plan. Yeah, that's absolutely right on, Rachel. Really great. I'm almost done. That was a big concern throughout England and London at that time as to what was going to happen. And again, we can go right back to that very beginning of the structure of order. So what happens if the top, if the hive is not having things brought back to it, what honey can happen? So Rachel's just brought us right back around to the beginning. Jan speaks of, Billy takes these heroic, iconic figures and eviscerates and tarnishes their legacy. It seems to make a strong statement against status quo. Yeah, he certainly tarnishes the mythology of their behavior, bringing them down into a bit more human perception of all that, rather than leaving them as mythological figures in their status of greatness. So we're just about out of time here, and I'm being pulled to go celebrate my son's 30th birthday of cake and candle blowing. So if you don't mind, we could end a couple minutes early, unless anybody has any last things to join in there.
Go blow out the candles.
That's great. Well, this is the child whose birth gave impetus to the creation of Capital Classics. So while we are in our 30th year, it was because this child was born in February of 1991. And my wife and I were figuring out what the hell are we going to do with our theatrical endeavors now. So we determined in 1991, well, we have to create our own. And that's when Capitol Classics was created. So they go hand in hand, our son and Capitol Classics. So, all right. Well, thank you guys for being here. I love seeing new faces. Rachel and Katie, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming in from Arizona, and everybody else who is new. Please come back. Next month is
March 1st.
It is March 1st, and it's Tempest as we look at the groups of Prospero, Antonio, and Sebastian, and then Caliban, Stefano, and Trinculo. So join us in March. Thanks for being here tonight.
And Jeff,
Everybody stay
contemporary classics on Saturday.
Right, through Heartbeat. Look at our website and Facebook to get the link. All right. Thank you, Maura and West Hartford Library, for making this happen. Everybody take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you. Thank you. Stay strong. Be well.
You all too.
Thank you, Kev. Thank you.